Please welcome the incredible Phoebe Lapine.
Hi, nice to be here.
I love it. We're going to talk about some really cool stuff. We might even talk about poop.
Yes.
Who knows?
Oh, for sure. I always
Oh,
talk
for
about
sure.
poop.
I love talking about poop. Well, welcome to the show. I am thrilled to have you here because you've written a book about carbs, and I want you to tell us about all the cool stuff you've accomplished. But what I really can't wait to dive in is debunking myths about gut health and why this isn't something to just pass over or skim over, because we're seeing more and more, and you probably know all the research about how gut health is like everything. It is
Absolutely.
everything. Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah. So tell us a little about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So I started off my career in the corporate world. And then I started a food blog on the side, got my first cookbook deal and quit to be kind of a food lady of many trades, and including cooking privately in people's homes and catering. And then ironically, kind of at the same time that my food career was beginning and taking off, I was also diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And that at first didn't impact things at all because I was 22 and really immature. And I was just like, la, 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 that didn't happen. And just like went on living my life. But then eventually those two plot lines dovetailed, and I had to really rethink both my personal outlook on food and my professional outlook. And I ended up taking gluten out of my diet and kind of falling down the rabbit hole of integrative health. And honestly, finding that, while Western medicine, kind of completely ignores the role of food in many ways, the integrative side could be a little overwhelming and rigid as well. And I kind of ended up finding my own happy middle ground, kind of a philosophy that I call healthy hedonism. And I wrote a book called The Wellness Project, just about how I kind of went through my own experiments as a guinea pig to find, the toolkit that really worked for me in dealing with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is my autoimmune disease. And also as someone who genuinely loves food and, didn't want to have such an omission based lifestyle. Then flash forward, my third book was about gut health because I was diagnosed with something called SIBO. I seem to just write the books that I wish I had had when I was going through some sort of struggle. And so that was the case with SIBO at the time in 2018, I want to say. It wasn't really known about. It's an acronym that stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, kind of a mouthful. And it's said to be kind of the root cause of over 60% of cases of IBS, which is a huge number of people. And the research is really like kind of ongoing and very fascinating. And kind of at the same time, there was a lot of talk in the wellness zeitgeist about gut health. And so dealing with this one acute issue I found to be really interesting, because a lot of my research up until that point, kind of things that I went over for the Wellness Project, didn't necessarily jive with what I was learning about SIBO, which just goes to show you, we're all dealing with so many subsets, so many acute issues, and there's really just no one size fits all solution for anyone. But anyway, we can get into the nitty gritty of that if you want. But flash forward, that was book number 3. Now I've written a book about carbs and kind of tying that into gut health and people with various health issues who have been told that they have to take carbs off the table, and kind of really looking at what is necessary on that front and kind of strategies that we can apply to our life so that we can keep, this major food group on the table without some of the consequences.
Well, and if you're anybody that works out to like build muscle and you're not eating carbs, what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, again, talk about things that don't have a one size fits all solution. Yeah. I mean, professional athletes like live on carbs because you are burning energy like to such an extreme degree. And carbs are energy. They're glucose. That is our energy molecule in its simplest form. And so if you take that out, or if you don't, give yourself the fuel that you need to get through a really tough workout, if you're the type of person who's doing intense things at the gym, like it's not going to end well for you. you really do need that in order to function and can't, I mean, especially those of us who deal with certain hormonal issues, thyroid issues, our body can't just find that fuel from within on its own. Like we do really need to have
Yeah.
glucose coming in to the plant.
Yeah. I love me some carbs. I'm not going to lie.
Well, and
Um,
there's that. There's that too.
oh, it just, yeah. I kind of feel like maybe it's just a psychosomatic association to I can't be full unless I have a carb.
Yeah. No, but that's how I feel too. And I do think that, and I wrote this in the intro to the book, that pleasure has become like a dirty word in the wellness community, when in fact, like it's such a hugely important part of our everyday happiness and wellness. And I don't know, on the carb front, I always just found the conversation to have gotten so strange and extreme, considering that, so many global cultures have existed for hundreds of years, with carbs as kind of the main component of their diet. And yet these modern diseases that people kind of, use carbs as a scapegoat for didn't exist. So, it's not the carbs in and of themselves.
It's
It's
a
what's
whole bucket
become
thing.
of them, and how we produce them, how we grow them, and how we
And we're
integrate them
always trying
onto
to
our
point a
plate.
finger too. It's like, oh, it's the
Oh,
carbs. I
always,
can't lose weight because
always.
of those damn carbs. Like, I don't know. Maybe you should work out.
Yeah, I know.
Body
Now it's
movement.
seed oils. Everyone's talking about seed oils. I'm like,
Yeah.
guys, this is the trans fat conversation from like 10 years ago. Like, just don't eat so much fried food. Like, it's common sense.
Yeah.
Like, these
So,
junky oils have been used for a long time in
yeah.
like food that you shouldn't be eating on a regular
I mean,
basis.
it's so crazy how just available this stuff is. And
Absolutely.
how, like, just going to the grocery store, it's just there and it's affordable
Hmm.
for the most part.
Yeah.
And when those people that don't know, and then they wonder why they're not feeling well. So I
Right.
was looking at, so there's a lot of like overlapping symptoms from like people that have SIBO or celiac or Hashimoto's. There's very similar, even like other thyroid issues.
Yeah.
Um, and like coming back to what I'm experiencing right now, I've always had issues with my stomach. I remember in
Mm.
grades 4 and 5. So gosh, how old are you in grade 4 and 5? You're what? Like,
You've had kids go through it
I know.
more
I'm trying
recently
to
than I
go
did personally. So,
backwards now. I'm not going to do that. I'm not doing the
like
math.
8 and 9, maybe.
Sounds great. So
Okay,
in the late
cool.
80s, when I had these issues, and probably none of this information was readily available, I was hospitalized for a while to get a bunch of tests done.
Oh
And back
wow.
then, they knew what celiac disease was. But I did all the tests, like the ones where you have to like fast for 24 hours as a kid
Mm-hmm.
and take these
Mm-hmm.
super heavy duty diuretics, and you're like completely emptied. And they're like, the results were, you'll grow out of it. Like, you'll grow out of it. There was no protocol in terms of like what maybe foods to avoid. This was the 80s. And I
Yeah.
don't blame them. But now we know more today. So, anyways, I go
Yeah.
through life thinking I've grown out of it. No, I have not grown out of it. So my symptoms are largely like SIBO. So
Mm.
I can be chronically bloated depending on like the season. I would eat
Yeah.
anything and instantly look pregnant. And I actually default to feeling better by not eating, yet I'm trying to condition to build muscle. so
Yeah.
and so all these things, and what it does now is I'm lethargic. I have like foggy brain. I
Mm.
like grapple for words all the time. And I'm like, it's right there, but I can't get it.
Yeah.
And I'm easily distracted. I'm not as creative as I used to be.
Mm.
And so why this conversation is important is because there's other people experiencing this, and it means that they're not showing up to their full potential in life, in business, as a mother.
Yeah.
And I want to chat with you about kind of how you went through this journey. And I know there's a lot of tests and a lot of time between tests, but let us know kind of your journey and these symptoms to going through to discovering what it was and what you're doing today really to show up in the full version of Phoebe that she can be.
Yeah. Well, I was really lucky in many ways because I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's by kind of my regular, um, my primary practitioner, which is rare because most people just look at kind of this one thyroid number, the TSH, which is kind of like the odometer of the thyroid. It's, tells you whether or not it's doing well or it's overwhelmed or whatnot, or if it's screaming for more hormone. But it doesn't actually look at how much hormone is in your system, and it doesn't look at the autoimmune component, which is measuring for antibodies. So you have to measure for antibodies in order to kind of confirm whether or not you have a sluggish thyroid because of this autoimmune issue. So I was lucky in that my doctor did that full panel. Again, I was unlucky in that I was 22 and like irresponsible and didn't like go on my own journey for a while until I'd hit rock bottom to figure out what that meant.
On that, so what? Quick pause right there.
Yeah.
So is this just a blood test?
It's just a blood test. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess in the States, you just ask your doctor for a full thyroid panel and to make sure that it includes the antibodies. I have kind of like a list on my site, but if you Google like kind of like a functional, thyroid panel, it'll come up. You're just looking for how much T3, T4 is in your system, and then checking for TPO antibodies.
Right. And those antibodies are the ones that are attacking your system. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. We don't want those.
So, no, we don't want those at all.
Yeah.
So essentially like any presence of those, I think like the number that they say is like anything above 10 is, means that you have Hashimoto's. I was at like 3,000 at one point.
Oh my God.
Like I really had,
really going for gold on this.
I had clinically like pretty extreme autoimmunity. And, I run autoimmune. That's what I've discovered in this journey. I was never a gut girl in my youth growing up. But things like really turned for me on a dime when I got mono in high school. And then I traveled after college and I was in Morocco and I think I got some sort of parasite and my stomach was never the same. I was always an omnivore. I was always someone with a healthy metabolism, big eater, like very athletic. And then, everything kind of went downhill and I just didn't know enough information about how all of these threads kind of wove together into the epidemic that is autoimmunity, because autoimmunity can come from so many things. Like, and it's often not, with any chronic condition, the same is true of SIBO. It's never one thing. It's always, kind of the culmination of several risk factors, of several instances. And then oftentimes there's kind of like one catalyzing event that,
brings
takes
it all
the
together.
Tinder that you've been building and lights the match and,
the perfect
lights
storm.
the whole thing on fire. Exactly. So for me, it was really like a slow process of coming to terms with that, of building my toolkit. And I did so much research, about gut health during that time. But with SIBO, again, I had to do a lot of testing. So the SIBO ironically came up for me when I was on like the tail end of my book tour for that book about how healthy I'd become, the Wellness Project. And it was funny because I was just doubling down on a lot of the kind of commonly like broad strokes wisdom of gut health, which is, eat as many different types of plants as possible, double down on fermented foods, double down on legumes, which, are really high in fiber and resistant starch, and things like cauliflower and like, all the health trends like cashew cream instead of dairy. And I was eating all these things and I was chugging kombucha and like my stomach was just inflating and inflating and inflating. I did. I was making myself miserable. And like, it took a few months for me. And again, people with SIBO, food is the enemy. You do get symptoms when you eat, which can be really complicating because it makes a lot of people have very deeply ingrained food fear. And it's not out of nowhere, like the food is triggering the symptoms, but it's not the food itself. It's the bacteria that are kind of in the wrong place in your intestinal tract, too far up, fighting for those resources and eating those food and producing gas in a place that is not close to your butt, so can't escape. Burping was weirdly one of my big symptoms and is for a lot of people because again, that gas has to escape one way or another. But if you're someone who just eats and immediately starts burping, like that's not normal. It wasn't
Whether
for
it's
me.
like a release valve, just like
I know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's what a lot of people with SIBO feel like. They're like, I feel like I have an inner tube in my abdomen and I need to like
yes.
poke myself like a balloon to let it all out.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
like it's sometimes for me, and I don't even know if I have this yet. I actually just finished doing a GI map test, sent it to my
oh, okay,
naturopathic
great.
doctor a couple days ago. But it'll be so painful that it feels like I'm getting stabbed.
Yeah, no, it's really, really uncomfortable. Like the distension is like a
Yeah.
big SIBO key symptom. Um, but I don't even remember what your original question was. But I went through a
About
lot of,
about yeah, your diagnosis, like your
oh,
symptoms
yeah,
leading up to really how you're managing it today.
how I'm managing it today. Yeah. So for me, and like, I think the process of doing the wellness project, like in real life, was really helpful for me because I think a lot of us can get to a point of obsession and get really bogged down with the kind of broy biohacking culture that is
Mhm.
dominating the wellness sphere these days. And in reality, like optimizing is very different than healing. And I don't personally think being 100%, it's not my goal. And I don't think it should be anyone's goal. Like I'm living with this disease. I haven't reversed it. I was too far gone, I think, when I began. I'm not willing to turn my life completely upside down and live in this kind of vacuum in order to put my health, so far in front of everything else in my life that maybe I would be 100%. To me, that's not 100%. That's,
But can you even be
sacrificing.
100%? Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's too hard. And that's the thing with antibodies too and autoimmune disease. It's like, you don't know what triggers it. Like you can test on a given day. And if you're having a stressful day, your antibodies might be up.
Uh-huh.
So for me, it's just not focusing too intensely and too obsessively on where I'm at in terms of numbers anymore. It's really just focusing in on symptoms. It's, kind of a maintenance phase. I feel like I've worked really hard over many years in like slow healing from these like kind of acute things. So like SIBO was like probably like a full year that I was working on
Yeah.
my gut. And
Mhm.
when people write me and ask for advice, that's always what I tell them. I'm like, give yourself a really long runway because it's the body. Like that's how long it takes. And I
So,
think,
and so on that, because there's a couple things, you can be prescribed an antibiotic. Is that correct for
yeah,
SIBO? Did
yes.
you do that?
I did the herbal antibiotics, herbal
Okay.
antimicrobials. There are pros and cons. I kind of go into like, I nerd out about it in my book, SIBO Made Simple. But there's kind of no right or wrong way. And oftentimes, again, like, so your large intestinal microbiome is more unique than a fingerprint. That is where all of your good gut critters are supposed to live. Your small intestine is where you absorb all of your nutrients. So it's not a place where bacteria have any sort of role because again, they're kind of competing for your food. Whereas when they're in your large intestine, they're kind of eating all of the leftovers. So all of the indigestible fiber that doesn't get absorbed through your bloodstream at all, that has a really essential role in feeding your microbiome. So when those critters are kind of trapped in this really long, craggy, winding path of
Slow. Yeah.
of your small intestine, and they have all of these readily available food sources of things that they love to eat, these really healthy fibers,
They're
they're just
happy.
gonna colonize, yeah, and stay for a while, and yeah, create a small village because that's happy living for them, but it's really, really uncomfortable, unhappy living for you. So unfortunately, a lot of people do try and, do various diet things, but for most people, to get rid of it, you have to do some sort of hardcore treatment that actually kills the bacteria.
Yeah. So I don't know if I have SIBO yet, but I'm just going to assume based on the symptoms, sure. And even just starting the process is still healthy and safe for me because I'm only doing supplements and actually cutting out foods. But I am literally on day 6
Mm,
of half calf until I'm completely caffeine free, no sugar, no gluten, no dairy, no alcohol, and a
okay.
lot of water. And I have had a consistent low grade headache
Headache.
for
Yeah.
like 6 days now,
It's
which makes me
probably
happy
honestly the
knowing that
sugar.
mm,
The
I
sugar
think
as
it's
much as the
happy.
caffeine.
I'm happy knowing that it's coming out of my body because I love sweets. I always have like, a little bit
Mm,
of something. So, but I don't even know if I have these things. All symptoms point towards SIBO. Even a woman that does
yeah.
my colonics every now and then is like, I think you have SIBO. It's like,
Oh
okay,
my.
cool.
Yeah.
So that's great. Let's go get this figured out. Knowing it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And I guess most
Yeah.
people are just not willing to go the course. Because that a year,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. I mean, it depends. There's just a lot of nuances with SIBO again because it's still kind of young as a diagnosis, and
yeah.
it's still something that we're learning about from a data perspective. Um, but yeah, it can be a long road with any gut condition. Like the gut can change, your microbiome can change pretty quickly within a month. But it also kind of like any damage that's done to your gut lining and to those populations do just take time to heal and to repair and to replenish.
So after you got your Hashimoto's diagnosis, do you remember what you did after that? Like,
Yeah, so I eventually, once I was at rock bottom with all of my symptoms and was like, maybe that autoimmune disease I was diagnosed with has something to do with like me losing my hair and like having like face
oh,
rash and
yeah,
like
what were
being
the
unable to
symptoms?
sleep.
So,
I mean, like fatigue and brain fog are actually a really big thyroidy symptoms. Insomnia was a really big one for me. I had, really bad gut issues that were probably some of my underlying causes for that. And so I had to like stop running because I would get these horrible cramps. But it
oh
was of course
wow.
like all of the vanity oriented things that really got my attention. So the face rash and the hair.
Oh,
But yeah, just being exhausted all the time. Your thyroid manages your energy. So it also manages your temperature. I had like real hot and colds, like hot flashes and numbness in my
oh, so
fingers
that's so
and feet.
interesting. I get that every
Yeah.
now and then. There was one summer, like 3 summers ago, where I was getting hot flashes so bad. I thought I was going
Mm.
through menopause.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even
Um,
40 yet.
well, I mean, checking your thyroid's low hanging fruit. You have to
Yeah.
ask for the full panel, but it's just not hard. So,
Okay.
it's just a vial of blood. So I would start there. But then, yeah, taking gluten out of my diet was one of the first things I did, which was really hard again, because I was embarking on a career as a food professional. And, even to this day, like food professionals don't have dietary restrictions on the big scale, like, like the real food stars, chefs in restaurants, like, no, you just don't. It's not done. There are no Food Network stars who are gluten free, to my knowledge. But
Wow.
yeah, so that was kind of my first big step, and I really did see kind of. I didn't. It didn't solve all my problems, but it definitely got me on a higher plateau. And there are a few reasons for that, but specifically for Hashimoto's and the autoimmunity involved in that. Your body is attacking your thyroid protein, and the theory is that the gluten protein looks very similar to the thyroid protein. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. Like if you already have all
Mhm.
of these antibodies in your system and you add, something that looks very similar to their target, then it's only going to kind of inflame the army. But, if you take away, you stop adding insult to injury, that can help, some of the forces recede and not be your immune system not be working so hard.
So you are not considered celiac then, or is that
No, no.
okay?
Yeah, celiac
What
is
happens
a
if you have gluten?
I mean, it's been 13 or 14 years for me at this point. So
Oh, wow.
I have loosened up a little bit on like cross contamination. But if I were to have like a full bite of pasta, I would feel incredibly nauseous. Like I would just notice a whole change in my system for
Oh, you're not
the next
celiac.
however
See,
many
it's so
days.
interesting how I
Yeah,
would
I'm
think
just very,
gluten
very
only.
sensitive.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
So we all just assume gluten's just if you can't digest gluten, then you're celiac. Didn't
No,
realize that.
there's a whole population of people with gluten sensitivity, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. That's like kind of the official moniker. And there are like a lot of reasons, or I guess theories about why that might be the case. The rise of autoimmunity is one of them, and just the whole
Okay.
philosophy of molecular mimicry, which is what I just explained, kind of your body mistaking one thing for something else that looks similar and your immune system going on the offensive. So doing an elimination diet, I think, can be really helpful for some people, but it has to be done right if you're looking for an autoimmune response. So you really do
Yeah.
have to take out that food kind of rigorously for 21 days, because that again allows your immune system to recede, antibodies to recede. And then when you reintroduce, you're going to get a very clear black and white reaction. Because what happens to a lot of people, and what happened for me is, your immune system is so inflamed, is so enraged that you don't necessarily notice, like when, especially things you're probably eating every day, like it's just a really bad baseline for you in terms of your quality of life,
Yeah.
and your digestive system, but you're not really kind of getting these alarm bells. So that's what happens with an elimination diet that you do for autoimmunity. There are other elimination diets. Actually, there's one called the low FODMAP diet that's really helpful for people with SIBO and IBS. That's like very data backed. Like even like your regular GI will prescribe it to you potentially. But that's more of a sensitivity test. So that's, taking out things that are potentially irritating, taking out, really healthy vegetables that again, like are bacterial fast food. So a lot of people who go on that diet and feel remarkably better, that's, I think, a pretty good sign that you have SIBO.
Well, one is two of them for me is broccoli and cauliflower.
Yeah, those are high FODMAP. Broccoli kind of medium, but cauliflower for sure. And as I mentioned, I was like doubling down on cashews, which are also really high FODMAP, doubling down on like eating cauliflower pizza instead of, the gluten-y pizza.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was just making myself absolutely miserable. So, again, if you're feeding things that in theory, like your good gut critters like to eat, but they're in the wrong place, then you're only going to be making yourself miserable. So
That's so
it's just
interesting.
about, removing them for a period of time and encouraging them to kind of go on their merry way and migrate to their proper place. Or, usually that's not enough and you have to take something to kill them. But
Mhm.
yeah, dealing with the Hashimoto's, that was kind of like my big change from a dietary perspective, was taking out the gluten. Oh, I didn't land the plane on why there's been an increase in gluten
Mhm.
sensitivity. Another theory is just the pesticides that are used, especially in America, Roundup, which can be really harsh on the gut. It's kind of designed to kill critters as a pesticide, and has a similar impact when it reaches your gut. A lot of people think it's because of GMO flour, and like the reality is that there is no GMO flour. There's GMO corn and other crops, but flour has just been hybridized, and it has been hybridized to have a higher degree of gluten, but that's like kind of not what could account for what we're experiencing. And then the big, piece of the puzzle that I think is really interesting and was very prevalent in my research with Carbivore is just how we produce a lot of gluten containing foods like pasta
Mhm.
and bread. We make them in such a different way, an industrialized process, than, they were made by artisans 100 years ago, or artisans at the farmers market. And so there are people who, say, I'm super sensitive to gluten, but I can eat true sourdough at the farmers market. And that's true
Well, people
for,
that go on trips to Italy don't have an issue.
oh, I'll
Yeah.
explain that one. That one's
Yeah.
that
Okay.
one is like, will really show you how different things are. But even
Okay.
at the farmer's market, if you're using sourdough fermentation, the sourdough eats some of the actual gluten content of your loaf. It eats some of the carb content of your loaf. So it's both kind of better for your blood sugar and can be easier to digest for people who are a bit sensitive to gluten. But I love, hearing from people who go overseas and like, they're like, I can eat pasta in Italy just fine. And I think that is really interesting because they think that the flour over there is super different and lower in gluten. And the reality is, for the case of pasta, it is absolutely not. It is higher in gluten because it's made from semolina, which is a high protein flour that's specifically used for pasta because we need that. The gluten protein is what, gives things that chew, that texture. And so especially with pasta, you want that beautiful bend. So there's a special type of flour in Italy that's used for it. High protein equals high gluten because gluten is a protein. So it's really not in the ingredient per se, but when you look at how pasta is processed, again, not in an industrial way, which does exist obviously in other cultures, but in the artisanal slow way of Italy, what happens is that pasta dough is made and then the noodles get slowly dried until they are hard and, shelf stable. But in an industrialized fashion, that process is sped up as fast as possible. Same is true when you're making bread in terms of rise time and whatnot. So what went from kind of like a slow, relaxed process goes to like a flash drying that takes, I don't know, I want to say 5 minutes, but don't fact check me on that. Yeah. But here's what happens. So the analogy I like to give people is when you're cooking protein, like a steak, let's say, and you take it straight from the fridge and you put it right in a hot pan, what happens to that protein? It seizes up and gets very, very tight. And, hopefully you wait till later to put it on your cutting board and let it relax again. But that's what happens in this quick drying process. So instead of, having this mesh of gluten that is nice and relaxed, it freezes up. And that is one reason why it's so much harder for our digestive system to break it down. It's like, the equivalent of like a beautiful loose knit to like, something that's stitched so tight together. So that's going to be a little bit harder on your digestive system. But yeah, ironically, it's not because it's lower in gluten. It's just,
See, I always thought it was because it just didn't use the chemicals that we do in North America.
That could be part of it. That could be part of it. But I think, since we're talking about
plays together.
Yeah. Since we're talking about gut myths today, in terms of my research, I just always keep coming back to how important how we're eating, how we're preparing our foods, how that factors in so much more than what specifically is on our plate.
Oh, that is so interesting. They never got that far in the process. And like, oh, geez, how I cook this might affect it. Well, I do know that raw cauliflower will probably end me in a grave. But cooked cauliflower doesn't have as much of an effect, but still affects me. Raw spinach kills me. Cooked spinach, no issue.
Well, when you said that it depends on the season, I was like, I bet you don't do well in summer because it's so much raw food.
I don't.
Yeah.
Summer's the worst.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's
why I'm going through everything now.
There was a whole fad with the raw food movement. But if you're a gut girly, like if you have digestive issues, like you want to focus on cooked food. You want things to be pureed perhaps. If like you're really struggling, you're really trying to go through a healing process. You want to give your digestive system a leg up because it doesn't have that innate fire to like plow through a bunch of roughage.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to a episode on the pursuit of wellness, and one of the guests talked about all of this too. And one of the things, and I don't know if this is something that relates to the work you've done or even yourself personally, but when you're going through issues like SIBO, that you need to actually give your gut a break so that you should actually be having extended periods between eating anything.
Yeah.
So like 2 or 3 hours.
Yes.
Is that true?
Oh, that's like one of the biggest SIBO things. Yeah. Meal spacing versus intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting became like, again, such a trend. But the reality is that the way your digestive system functions is that you need that downtime in between meals in order for your little machinery to do its job. So there's this nerve wave system called the migrating motor complex, and it only kicks in during a fasting state of 90 minutes or more. And its function is literally, again, I mentioned the small intestine, it has a larger surface area than a football field. It is huge.
That's crazy.
And and it's all stuffed in your abdomen. So you can just imagine how, bacteria can easily just like pull off an exit ramp and like find a little corner to like, hang out a little nice looking cranny to build a shanty town. But what prevents that from happening ordinarily in a healthy functioning digestive system is this migrating motor complex. So you have kind of a muscle wave that moves food through the tube, but then the migrating motor complex literally is like the street sweeper after a meal. It just makes sure that any little debris that's left behind is like washed from the dishes. And, again, moves through that huge system. And so they've found, or the hypothesis for, kind of the main SIBO researcher is that one of the big buckets of underlying causes for why people develop this issue is because of a breakdown in the migrating motor complex, some sort of stagnation. And I think that the way we eat has a huge, plays a huge role in that, because we have been taught as a society to just like snack all the time. People started saying, oh, don't have big meals, have lots of little meals throughout the day. Oh, intermittent fast, and then just pack all of your eating into this one window. But the reality is, even if you're eating a quote unquote healthy snack, like a handful of almonds every 5 minutes, your migrating motor complex does not click into gear. It doesn't, you need that 90-minute fasting window for it to actually do its job. So for me, less like the intermittent fasting and more just encouraging people to build in those 4 hours in between meals, I think is so important. And I know there are a lot of people with, blood sugar dysregulation and, who just say, I can't make it 4 hours. Like I'm ravenous after 2 or even 30 minutes. And that to me is like a huge sign that there's work to do in terms of building out
Just
bigger
drink
meals.
water.
Yeah. Not being so afraid of having a big lunch that might get you through the day. And then also just looking at how we can regulate our blood sugar so that we don't have those cravings, so that we can stay full for longer.
So 4 hours is what the recommendation is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
I mean, yeah, you're supposed to eat
how
3
do you,
meals a day, 3 like main meals a day, like 1 at 9, 1 at 1, 1 at 6. I don't know. Yeah.
9,
Breakfast,
1,
lunch, and dinner. Choose the times. I don't care.
Okay. Now I'm like, okay. So I'm also doing 75
Yeah.
hard right now, which is crazy on top of all of this. But focus you to be disciplined. Do you know 75 hard, the program?
No.
Yeah. Oh my God. My listeners are probably like, here goes Renee again. This is my second time doing this. It's 75 days. So
Whoa.
this guy named Andy Frisella created this program because he challenged himself to lose a certain amount of weight in a certain amount of time. And now it's become this whole thing. So for 75 days, you have to do 2 45-minute workouts. One has to be outside, drink a gallon of water, take progress photos, follow a diet, no cheat meals or alcohol, take progress pictures. So it's not terrible, except for the extra workout always throws me for a loop. It'll be like 9 p.m. Like, crap, didn't do the other workout.
Wait, there are 2 workouts?
2 45-minute workouts.
Oh, I missed the 2 part. I'm like, that sounds
But and
like,
they don't have to be gnarly.
reasonable.
Like, we're not going to CrossFit and crush it twice a day.
Yeah.
No, I usually do like, I have a dog, so I walk him
Just
45-minute
walk.
walks
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
I think that sounds pretty healthy.
So then I try to structure my day in terms of like, if the recommendation is 4 hours between, is this like any food? Like no snacking, nothing at all in between?
I'm not pro snacking. I hate to say it. Yeah, you're not going to find me
Tell us how it
encouraging
is.
snacking.
We definitely live in a culture where everywhere you go, there's a snack available.
Yeah.
It's in your face, at the checkout counter. It's everywhere.
Everywhere. Yep. I know. And then those snacks usually are packed with sugar and not particularly good for your blood sugar either. And therefore means you're probably going to be hungry for another snack sooner than if you just waited for your meal.
So this 4-hour window, is this recommended for everybody?
I mean, again, I can only give you the feedback that I've gotten from people that I've worked with in a group setting and just like from being a writer on these subjects. But it is one of those things that people who have dealt with SIBO write me and they're like, I didn't believe in, this as a cure-all. And they're like, it's the thing that's had the biggest impact in my life.
Oh, wow. So
yeah,
my mind is just like slowly coming online right now in all of this, because obviously did not want to hear this. I love snacks. But at the same time, it makes a lot of sense. Like when this gentleman started talking about this on this episode, I think he said 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
do what you can. Again,
yeah,
keeping in mind this like kind of 90-minute
the stretch
um
is,
migrating
yeah,
motor complex thing. But it's another reason why you kind of don't want to eat too close to bedtime because again, like your digestive
yeah.
system kind of goes on hiatus when you're sleeping and if it hasn't done enough work like before you go horizontal and before you go to sleep, again, there's going to be food just kind of hanging
Hanging out.
out.
Man, I get my
Yeah,
best sleeps when I'm a little bit hungry before I go to bed.
a little hungry. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So we
Well,
follow this
good.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1 rule in the house. And so 5 hours before bed is don't consume any alcohol. My husband's sober.
Hmm.
I like to drink wine. And part of what I'm doing for 75 Hard is just taking a break from all that stuff.
Yeah.
4 hours before bed, nothing emotional. So don't watch the news,
Hmm.
avoid social, don't have those
Hmm.
tough conversations because if you're not good at processing it, you bring it with you to bed and you have a terrible sleep. 3 hours before bed, no food. 2 hours before bed, stop electronics. And an hour before bed, stop drinking water.
Hmm.
And if you can follow that and you make that into your nighttime routine, that discipline helps you with your sleep because now we're
Yeah.
seeing more and more research that a good night's sleep is the foundation for
Oh,
almost
yeah.
everything.
Super important for gut health, super important for carb tolerance and blood sugar regulation. Yeah, no, I think that system sounds great. I don't have that kind of discipline, but in theory, it sounds wonderful.
Yeah, no. But some people are like, I can't sleep at night. I'm like, but are you doing this, this, that? No,
Yeah.
no, no.
Yeah.
It's like, well, and it works for me. And it's not like we're perfect on this. Like there are some nights when I'm just really not ready to go to bed. So maybe I'll watch something.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I want to know what are some of the common myths about gut health that you hear that might be
Mm.
like popular opinion and you're like, nope.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of went through a few of them. I think, again, like focusing too heavily on what you're eating instead of, the actual process of eating. I mean, people talk about mindful eating. I think that can be like a whole umbrella, but, chewing your food would be a big one. I know it's not sexy. It's not fun. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a cure all either, but chewing your food, meal spacing, I think are hugely important. Um,
Mm.
and then, yeah, I think people completely underestimate the like role that stress and emotional health plays in your digestion, in your blood sugar. And these are things that are data backed. Like the data is there that they matter. I won't say they matter more than like not eating like, drinking a 32-ounce Coke, but, they can set you off on a much better path for when you do want to integrate, some things that maybe a little bit more hedonistic. So when you think about how, our stress response actually works in our body, back in the jungle, when we experienced, a cortisol surge, it was because we saw like a jaguar or a lion or some sort of big cat coming at us. So our body's, intrinsic response is, the heightened awareness that those stress hormones bring us and
Yeah.
also a naturally elevated blood sugar because our body knows that the response is not just cognitive, that we're going to have to run like hell to get away from that big cat. So if you're stressed all the time, your blood sugar is naturally going to be at this elevated place, which means that when you eat your favorite carb, when you eat dessert, it's just going to have much more of a volatile response than if you were starting from a place of calm. And I think it's really important because, again, I said, especially those of us with digestive issues who have dealt with SIBO, like food can become the enemy and can become this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where you sit down and you're stressed about the food on your plate and you're worried about the symptoms that are going to rise before you've even put a bite of food
Yeah.
in your mouth. And
Yep.
yeah, it's not, it's none of these things are all in your head. Like your head really does play a role in how your symptoms arise sometimes.
Well, so my hormone specialist friend, I did the Dutch test with her in the fall,
Mm-hmm.
which I love all these tests because it gives you a good baseline. And she's like, "Oh yeah, you could be pre-diabetic." And my reaction was, "But I'm not overweight."
Yeah.
And what was fascinating, now I'm connecting all the dots, and maybe she'd mentioned this too, is how that stress level elevates the blood sugar. Now I get it. And so if
And
I'm
it could be so many
operating,
different things.
well,
Yeah.
that, but she just knows my lifestyle too. So operating in a place of stress all the time,
Yeah.
I get it. I
Yeah.
totally get it.
And, all of these things with health are kind of a vicious cycle. If you have, disrupted microbiome or digestive distress, that is also going to mean that you have a more volatile, volatile blood sugar and, less of an ability to have that carb tolerance. We each, have a different reaction to foods. I can eat a piece of cake and my husband can eat the same piece of cake, and our blood sugar response can be drastically different. And it's because of all these lifestyle factors. It's because of, again, some of it's genetics.
Yeah.
But just the way, especially for women, all of our hormones play together.
Yeah.
Thyroid health also impacts your carb tolerance. It's all connected.
We
And
are
then of
so
course,
complex.
and then of course your metabolism, your ability to have stable blood sugar impacts your gut health as well. So unfortunately, these things go
Mhm.
both ways, but I like to look at it from a positive perspective, is that there's always a different in. And kind of my whole experiment with the wellness project was, you don't have to do all of the above all at once. Like, you really can pick and choose, the self-care things that resonate for you, that you see a big physical transformation with, and or that are actually enjoyable for you. Like for me,
Yeah.
I was not a big snacker. I don't keep snacks in the house. So the meal spacing like comes easily to me. It's something I don't even think about anymore. And sometimes I snack, it's like I'm not rigid about it. It's just kind of the lifestyle that I've set up for myself at home, not to have like a million packaged snacks that tempt
Yeah.
me. But for some people, maybe that's a deal breaker. Maybe that's going to be too hard. And so you can come at it from another angle. All of these lifestyle factors, your sleep, as we mentioned, your stress, just start somewhere. And I promise you, if you dig in, if you find a foothold in one of these buckets, you're going to see a positive halo effect across a lot of different areas of your health.
I'm going to start spacing. Like I'm going to cut back on my snacks. We're going to start that because right now there's just a lot going on in my body. But that is so good, cutting back on snacks. Anytime I left the house, I always brought like a protein bar with me. I didn't necessarily eat it, but I was worried that I might get hungry.
Yeah, I have a lot. Once I went gluten free, I had a lot of like food
Oh yeah.
insecurity.
Right. And there's always places to get something to eat. And we live 10 minutes from anywhere. So it's not like I was
You're going to the
dropping my
wilderness.
son
Yeah.
off at soccer and I was going to be gone for 5 days. Um, Water always comes with me. There's no negotiating that. This is also fascinating and exactly why I wanted to bring you on this show, because I do believe that most of us suffer from variations of something here, especially in the society that we live in. And we're just exposed to so much crap, from crap snacks to crap knowledge, all this leading back to like, think about where the money goes, right? And we just need to step back and actually prioritize our health
Yeah.
on a level that makes us function better as a human, to show up as a mother.
Yeah.
And some of us just can't do that because we're so exhausted. Um, Couple last questions for you. One is my favorite question. When I ask you what it means to be a wild woman, what does that mean to
Ooh.
you?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I feel like it means being unencumbered by the noise within, by self doubt, by any of like, again, your own self fulfilling limitations, um, and just kind of an openness to the world.
Love it. So you have quite a few books, and a lot of cool things going on, but where are you sending people to today?
Yeah. So if you want any free recipe resources or just more info on SIBO, you can go to my website, feedmephoebe.com. That's where I'm always like producing new content. if the SIBO conversation resonated with you, I have a podcast that I did for a few years. I haven't contributed to it in a little while, but it's there for you to listen to as an anthology from episode 1 if you want to learn more about SIBO. It's called SIBO Made Simple. And then if reading is more of your thing, the SIBO Made Simple book is kind of a hybrid cookbook and complete treatment Bible. And then my latest book, Carbivore, you can find at carbivorecookbook.com. Unfortunately, most search engines will autocorrect carbivore to carnivore, which is not the theme of the book. So go to carbivorecookbook.com and you can get a bunch of links to where to find that, but it's also available wherever books are sold.
I love it. I'm definitely going to check out these resources. Phoebe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.